It was a frigid winter afternoon in Cleveland, Ohio, and the city streets were bustling with their usual noise and activity. The sharp sounds of honking horns, hurried footsteps, and scattered conversations filled the frosty air. Leonard sat slouched against the wall of a rundown convenience store, positioned on the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue. His layered clothes, though meant for warmth, were thin and worn, providing little defense against the biting wind. Next to him lay a simple cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps. God bless." At 42, Leonard had been living on the streets for nearly a year. A series of devastating setbacks had upended his life, stripping him of his job, his health, and finally his home. Each day felt like an uphill battle, and most people who passed by didn't even acknowledge his presence. Occasionally, someone might toss a few coins his way, but more often than not, they averted their gaze and continued walking as if he were invisible. Leonard adjusted his tattered beanie, letting his eyes drift downward to the steady stream of shoes moving past him. Heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then, something different caught his attention. A pair of spotless white sneakers came to a stop just a few feet away from him. These weren't ordinary shoes. They exuded a level of luxury that suggested privilege and wealth. Curious, Leonard lifted his gaze to see who they belonged to. Standing before him was a tall teenager, his posture casual yet composed. Dressed in a sleek, stylish jacket, the boy had his hands tucked into his pockets as he scrolled on his phone. He seemed entirely unaffected by the surrounding commotion of the busy city. Leonard squinted, feeling a vague sense of familiarity, but unable to place the boy's face. Around them, murmurs began to spread as some onlookers discreetly pulled out their phones to take pictures. Leonard hesitated briefly, unsure whether to speak up. Normally, he avoided initiating conversations unless someone made eye contact first. But something about this boy's calm demeanor encouraged him to try. "Hey, young man," Leonard called out, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Can you spare $1?" The boy froze mid-scroll, tilting his head slightly as if to confirm what he'd just heard. Slowly, he turned toward Leonard, his expression unreadable but composed. For a brief moment, it felt as though the chaos of the city had quieted. Leonard braced himself for the usual indifference. "What do you need it for?" the boy asked. His tone was steady and free of judgment, catching Leonard off guard. "A cup of coffee would be nice," Leonard replied, rubbing his hands together in an attempt to generate some warmth. "Maybe a sandwich, if I'm lucky." His voice wavered slightly under the boy's direct gaze. The teenager slipped his phone into his pocket and took a step closer. Leonard suddenly became aware of the crowd's silent attention. People were watching, their curiosity and quiet judgments hanging heavy in the air. But the boy's steady presence kept Leonard from retreating. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he answered hesitantly. "I'm Barron," the teenager replied simply, his tone neutral but sincere. There was no trace of arrogance or self-importance in his voice. To Leonard's surprise, Barron crouched down so that they were at eye level. The gesture startled Leonard. It wasn't something he was accustomed to. Most people avoided him entirely, let alone brought themselves down to his level. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his voice calm and measured. "Almost a year," Leonard admitted, his voice low and uncertain. "I lost my job when the plant shut down, then my health started to go downhill. I couldn't keep up with rent after that." He swallowed hard, the bitter reality of his words making them harder to say. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his expression focused but free of pity. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, some onlookers openly recording the unusual sight. Leonard could feel his face flush with embarrassment under their watchful gazes. "What about family?" Barron asked after a moment. Leonard's jaw tightened as he shook his head. "Don't have much left," he said, his voice bitter. "My parents passed away years ago. My brother, well, we haven't talked in forever." He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Not much left to lose when you've already lost everything." Barron seemed to take a moment to process Leonard's words. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's heart began to race. He'd only asked for $1, but the boy's deliberate movements hinted at something more. When Barron's hand emerged from his pocket, he wasn't holding the single dollar Leonard had asked for. Instead, he held out a crisp $100 bill. "This should cover more than coffee," Barron said, his tone calm and straightforward. Leonard's eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the bill. His hands trembled slightly as he hesitated to take it. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice cracking with a mix of surprise and confusion. "Because I can," Barron replied with a small shrug, his tone casual yet sincere. Before Leonard could find the words to respond, Barron leaned in closer, his voice lowering as though to ensure only Leonard could hear him. "This isn't just about the money," he said, his expression steady and focused. "I want you to promise me something." "What's that?" Leonard asked, his grip tightening on the bill as though it might vanish. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" The words hit Leonard harder than the gesture itself. It wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge, an opportunity for him to rise above his circumstances. Leonard nodded, his throat tight with emotion, unable to speak. Satisfied, Barron reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a small notepad and pen. He scribbled something down quickly and tore off the piece of paper. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," Barron said, handing the note to Leonard. "They'll help you out. Just tell them Barron sent you." Leonard unfolded the note carefully, his hands still trembling. It was the address of a local shelter and resource center / U-2014, a place he'd heard of before but had never visited. Either out of pride or shame, the next morning, Leonard stood outside the building listed on the note. The modest structure bore a simple sign that read, "Hope Outreach Resource Center." Clutching the note in his pocket, Leonard hesitated briefly, feeling a mix of nerves and uncertainty. Summoning his courage, he stepped inside. The warmth of the building was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. At the front desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes greeted him warmly. "How can I help you today?" she asked. Leonard hesitated for a moment before pulling out the note and sliding it across the counter. "Barron sent me," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. The woman's eyes softened as she glanced at the note. "We've been expecting you," she said with a reassuring smile. "Come with me. Let's get you started." Over the next several hours, Leonard met with a caseworker who listened to his story without judgment. Together, they outlined a plan to help him get back on his feet. He was assigned a temporary bed in the shelter, scheduled for a doctor's appointment, and enrolled in a job training program. For the first time in what felt like forever, Leonard began to feel like his life might finally change. Meanwhile, a video of Barron's interaction with Leonard had gone viral, spreading rapidly across social media. People were captivated by the young Trump heir's unexpected act of generosity. The video was shared with hashtags like #KindnessChallenge and #PayItForward, inspiring thousands of people across the country. Donations poured into the Hope Outreach Resource Center, enabling them to expand their programs and help more individuals like Leonard. Volunteers stepped forward in record numbers, moved by the simplicity and sincerity of Barron's gesture. But Barron remained silent amidst the growing attention. He declined interviews, avoided public statements, and ignored the online buzz. For him, the moment hadn't been about gaining recognition / U-2014, it had been about helping someone in need and encouraging others to do the same. As Leonard settled into his new routine at the shelter, he began to notice subtle changes in himself. The kindness he experienced from the staff and the resources they provided reignited a sense of hope that he thought he'd lost forever. Slowly but surely, Leonard started to believe that he could rebuild his life, one step at a time. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Leonard was sitting in the shelter's common room when a man approached him hesitantly. Leonard looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing before him was his younger brother, Paul. "I saw the video," Paul said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know things had gotten this bad. I should have reached out sooner." Leonard shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears. "It's not your fault," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "But I'm glad you're here now." The reunion was bittersweet / U-2014, a mix of regret for the time they had lost and hope for the future they could rebuild together. For Leonard, it was another step toward healing, not just his circumstances, but his relationships as well. In the weeks that followed, Leonard's story became a beacon of hope for countless others. What had started as a simple act of kindness on a cold winter day had grown into something much bigger / U-2014, a movement that inspired people nationwide to take action. For Leonard, the impact was deeply personal. The $100 had helped him in the moment, but Barron's words and the promise he'd made were what truly carried him forward. They reminded him that even in his darkest hours, there was still a chance for brighter days ahead. As Leonard continued taking steps toward rebuilding his life, he carried Barron's note with him everywhere. It was a tangible reminder that someone had seen his worth when he couldn't see it himself. And that single moment of kindness had not only changed his life, but had sparked a ripple effect, showing the world the power of compassion.